Hello again. We are here connected from the Kunstquartier Bethanien for the conference Beyond Control, and this is the panel of today that is related to digital authoritarianism. And today we will speak about very important facts related to war, post-war, but also about resistance. And we will mention 3 different stories from Gaza, Ukraine, and Azerbaijan. And I'm very happy to welcome our speakers that then I'm going to introduce more in depth later. But first of all, I want to say hello to Manolo Luppichini, that is a filmmaker and author, and Arzu Geybulla, journalist and editor from Global Voices and AzNet Watch, and Tetyana Lokot, associate professor in digital media and society at the Dublin City University. So, as I said before, the topic is about digital authoritarianism and also how we can challenge network authoritarianism. I feel first to introduce a bit this concept because it's a concept that can sound vague, but instead is also very specific. I want to thank again Global Voices also for the collaboration in shaping the concept in relation to this term. And if we speak about digital authoritarianism, then we could refer to how digital platforms are being used to oppress people in non-democratic contexts, but also in Western democracies. Also, the exploitative use of information technology in war zone, as well as the context of strategic targeting of dissidents, journalists, and minorities. So we will see that by speaking about different stories and cases and also war context, this panel will touch all these issues in different forms. And it's also important to connect with these topics of monopoly of communication channels and also how digital authoritarianism is used to maintain power and distort reality. That we know this is pretty much connected also with the discourse of propaganda. But at the same time, what we want to do with this panel is also to discuss a framework for ethical and just use of information and also counter this form of digital oppression that can be done through grassroots empowerment. And also we will see circumventing restricted access to digital infrastructure in war. And in that sense, we can turn around the discourse of digital authoritarianism in imagining the discourse of distributing tools to fight digital oppression. So I don't want to keep my introduction too long because I think what we are going to discuss today is way more important of my words, and I will immediately pass the words to Manolo Luppichini that is going to speak about the Gaza Web3 project that is providing digital access within Gaza. And I want to introduce Manolo properly. I mean, we know each other from like the 90s, but yes. This is not just part of his professional description, but I have to say that, yeah, I know him and the important work he did in the course of the past 30 years. He's a filmmaker and author from Italy, and over the past 25 years, he co-founded many media projects combining technology, social issues, and art. For example, the Church of Electrosophy, Candida TV, Derivia Prodi, Indie Media, among others. He has been a film director since 1994, working on documentaries, music videos, and advertising campaign, filming in Europe, the US, Africa, Middle East, and South Asia. And his work have been aired on Rai, Mediaset, Fox Life, Sky, Al Jazeera, Schweizer Fernsehen, and Prime TV, Rai 3 TV show Presa Diretta. So Manolo, I pass now the word to you and welcome at the Disruption Lab.
Thank you. I'm embarrassed. I didn't remember all these things. Thank you. Getting aged, you know, you lose the memory. So I'll get to the point now. What you didn't mention is that lately I'm working also as in NGOs, trying to help out. I've been many times in Palestine, in the occupied territories, and in Gaza in the past, just filming or doing workshops. I've been teaching how to use cameras to young people, especially around Bethlehem, the Heisha camp, and those parts. And it was a great honor to do that. And I want just to tell you one little story that really changed my mind in how important it is to give the tools. I was in the Heisha camp, close to Bethlehem, giving this course to these kids. And the kids usually played down the street with guns, with fake guns, you know. They simulate the war, what they see all the time. So this was going on. Then we did this course, we invented some story, we edited, and it was fun for them. And the best result I ever had in my life was that in the last days of my permanence there, one of the kids was building up a fake camera to film, to pretend filming what was going on. I consider that my best success, actually, in terms of interventions, you know. But yeah, so that to give you the idea how to intervene, to be there, to physically put your body in the game changes a lot in other people's life. So I'm working now helping out ACS, which is an NGO based in Padua. There is some people from Padua here, you know, and they have been working for more than 20 years in the territories and in Gaza Strip, setting up projects for young people, mostly for young people, cultural projects, but also stuff like putting desalination for the water, stuff like this, stuff that would help the communities to raise their head. And so we have a lot of relations down in Gaza, especially with the people working with us on different projects. Then this, I don't know how to describe, offensive, let's say, started, and the situation got really bitter. And we had troubles in communicating with the people because the access to internet and to web went down. I will show you now some data about it. But just to give you why we started to do this, so we knew about what was going on, but we had a direct problem to communicate with our people down. That they are doing now, they are working in kitchens. We have 3 kitchens, actually, 2 in Rafah, 1 in Gaza City, which, because we thought it was the most important thing to manage to feed people. But also we couldn't communicate. So with a bunch of nerds, of friends, we started to think how to work it out. So I'll go through my slides. You're offline, yeah, that was the framework. We were facing a big problem in communicating with our staff, and we knew there was a big problem within Gaza. Especially the people to communicate with each other, because there's a problem. Yes, there's in, out, in, but there's a problem in. I mean, people need to keep their relations, you know. Families need to know what's happening to another person in another side of the stripe. So it was very, very important. We felt the need. So this is how it went down, you see, the connection. This is until the, what was 5th, yes, I wrote it, January 5, I wrote it, and it was a problem. Now the latest are getting a bit better, but it's really, it depends also on the areas. Here we have a phase of the whole strip, but it's still very problematic. This is something this is a picture I took in London a month ago. And this gives you the importance of what we're having now, what we're facing now. Imagine what was happening before. So we started to think about how to keep Gaza connected. We started to think big, maybe too big. And so we thought about building up, because we have some friends, they couldn't come, actually. I'm not a technician, so I will not go deep into the technical issues, but just to give you an idea. So this was some friends have been doing these projects in Mexico and in Ukraine as well. In Rojava, actually, also, to set towers with GSM or 3G. It's actually more easy than we think, so that they could give free access to telephone and to internet to people. But it's very expensive, and you need to have towers to set up properly. Then we thought about Wi-Fi, WiMAX, because it's possible to have long-range connection through that, but you need to point. So that was very difficult. So would put people at stake, because if there are drones hovering all the time on Gaza, and if you see people trying to do some weird works on top of some roof, that will be a target. So we thought that was not a good idea. After all, it was too risky exposing people on the other side, and also getting the permission on the Egyptian side. Obviously, everything would happen on the border. Now you have this tiny border that separates life from that. It's amazing. I was there 2 weeks ago in Rafah from the Egyptian side with a delegation of PMs and academics, journalists, and it was an amazing scene, because what we saw was really hard to take. When you see thousands, we counted more than 2,000 trucks waiting, with all the aids, with the food, with the stuff, with mattresses, with anything, and they were stopped. While they were dropping airdrops or inventing other strange ideas, while it was so easy to just open the bloody doors and let that stuff in. Those airdrops were like the most crazy thing I ever seen, because they were, besides dropping, when the parachute didn't open, they've been killing people. At least 8 people were killed. Some others went into the sea, and people drowned in order to reach them. But then, most of all, if there is a system that gives to the people, shares those hate to the people, only the stronger people will get there and gets the stuff, and then maybe even sell it again, or it just increases the violence and the disequality. So it was really crazy. Anyway, I'll go on. I'm sorry I'm diversing, because it's so much going on there. Was very, very hard feeling, understanding what is going on that tiny border. We were just 100 meters from people starving, and we had tons of food on the other side. This is really beyond acceptable. There are also satellite links. In fact, many of the journalists or the international agencies, they are using that. But it's just for some people who can access. And then we found out about the eSIMs. And because it's an Egyptian lady, started to directly send to people these eSIMs. Now I will explain you what it is. And that was actually working. Some people that has specific telephones that they're compatible with eSIMs could get this eSIM, because it's virtual, so you get just a code to activate them. And then you can actually link to Egyptian providers or even Israeli providers. You cross the border with a radio signal. So we came out with web trees. That was the idea. Because, and this is the artist at Zero Calcare gave us this drawing, and really gives back the idea of it. It's not just communicating outside, but also the relation, and how to share communication within Gaza. So it's based on the SIMs. You see, the eSIM, it's like virtual; it doesn't exist, but only this specific, quite latest telephones are compatible with this system. So who was sending just the eSIM was not taking care of the poorest people, of who wouldn't doesn't have access to such technology. So we thought to using it in another way, using telephones as routers, very simple, and then with a hotspot, making, getting it accessible even to the most primitive telephone, so that through that, everybody could have access to internet. And so this was the idea. We started to raise some money, to send the money inside. They managed to buy in the black market these telephones. Also, that was very important is to provide energy to charge them, because the other problem is that they cut out the energy. And so we managed to get them to buy some solar panels and some power banks, so that they could last longer. And I don't remember. So this is very funny drawing I did, like my art. So just to explain the technique, It's funny. So we sent the eSIM just from Italy through the web when they provided, and they get this eSIM activated. So through that. Now I will tell you the story of the bucket, which is very funny. They managed to get the web signal. This is actually one of the very first web trees in action. That's it. Okay, the sound you heard is of a bloody drone hovering over the head constantly. This is a sound that doesn't stop in Gaza. I remember when I was there, time ago already it was there. You had actually the dirigibility, how you say, the balloons, but now they have drones constantly, also because that sound gives pressure. It's a psychological. When they don't use them one of the ladies I was talking to a friend, lately they are playing through the drones the voices of children crying, asking for help, or of women crying, asking for help, so the people goes out to reach for them and they get killed. This is something that is actually happening. We have proofs of this. We heard it. So this goes beyond cruelty. I don't know how to describe this. I was talking about words. We are losing words. The vocabulary is not enough to describe what the hell that is going on there. It's really, I'm finding hard to describe the anger. So I present you the first web gardener. This is Ali Tayeh. He's an artist. He's a visual artist from Gaza. We've been doing other projects together in the past, and he decided, he was the first one joining the group from Gaza, and he's doing a great job. He's got a wife and a daughter. And they decided, to give you also the scope of it, they decided not to live together anymore, so that if they get bombed, at least somebody of the family will survive. Families are scattering in order not to be destroyed completely, as is happening very often. So this gives you also the way that the system they try to find to survive, to at least have something going on. Am I late? 10 minutes. Blah, blah. Okay, so this is another Web3 within a village in Geybulla, and also because you will see in the open areas, women have difficulties. It's more difficult to see them close to the beach and stuff because. And so this system that Ali came out with, it's serving a whole area like a neighborhood. And it's very nice, and we hear the voices. It's not everything is audible, but you understand the.
Good morning, everybody. Now I am put the phone up there to good signal and make us to do a Web3. This is the area. We have a lot of building here. You can use the eSIM all they can use the internet.
So this bucket thing became like a logo for us somehow, because obviously it makes sense to get the signal you need to raise it, and it was hard. Sometimes they go on top of roof, but they get targeted, and so this idea of getting this bucket up, I think it's so simple and so crazy, and it actually works. And so we're primitive but effective. So this is what is happening down in Gaza, and we're very proud of this, of the creativity. So you see in the alleys, they are working, they are using internet, also the ladies. And again, you see another bucket here working, and a Web3 with few people, and again, our friend Ali telling us what's going on.
Hello everybody, we are here in point Web3 free internet here in Deir el-Bala, Gaza Strip. We make a point for the people to make connect for internet. Thank you for your support us to make this project here in Gaza, but this point it's not enough. We need more than for a lot area here in Gaza. They didn't have internet. We will make internet for all Gaza Strip, and thank you very much. I am Ali Taya from Gaza.
Such a sweet guy, you know how sweet is Ali. So, but now, now the bad news, because so not only us, not only Ali, and we have now about 20 points around doing this job. But these areas become more and more visible, where you can actually get the signal. And just 2 days ago, while a group of people was connecting in one of the areas where it's possible to do it, there was a bombing. And you see the result of the bombing. 6 people was killed in this area just 2 days ago, just for connecting to internet. They were gathering. Luckily, just for there is another guy, it's called Bilal. Here we are in Gaza City, actually, just a bit north of it. And just by chance, our Web3 was not active in that moment. He was late for some reason, and that saved his life. But 6 people died. So this to understand that what is constantly going on there, and even trying to get an internet connection, even trying to find out if your brother or father is being killed, expose you to such a danger. So I will be short. This is our project. From this, you can get the link to our crowdfunding, which hasn't started yet. We'll start from next week, but we open already, and so I accelerate it and make it available for you. So who can help us? You see what we're doing. we are trying to do our best to make this happen. And in front of what, after a careful investigation by the International Court of Justice that instructed Israel to prevent genocide, ensure that Israeli forces don't commit genocide, and prevent and punish incitement to commit genocide. This is what the International Court of Justice has said, so it's not my words, I'm just quoting what the main court in our planet stated. And to this instruction, Israel didn't comply at all. So far, actually, they made the situation even worse. So this is what I want everybody to be acknowledged. I know that in Germany it's very hard to say, to pronounce certain words, but I think we also need to raise our head and face in case repression in order that this thing doesn't happen anymore. this is very dark part of our history, and we need to be brave and risk and raise our head in front of such a cruelty and ferocity, because if this is what is going to happen in the future, can you imagine, you know, everybody can raise their head, can kill people without having any responsibility. So we are working now in Italy, starting to build a network of tents. We're building up tents where people can discuss and protest, especially to restore the international right. We think that that is a very important base to restore and apply, implement international right. And that will touch all what we are talking about in Azerbaijan, in Ukraine, everywhere, and then in Somalia, in Ethiopia, in Sudan, in Mali, and everywhere there is a war. Because if we don't apply and state again strongly that there is a rule to be respected that is shared by everybody, if those rules made by humans are not respected, then people will turn out, as they're doing, to the rules of God. And we have people, because they don't have any other chance, because we see that the rules of men are not respected. And how can you convince people that there is an alternative to the extremism, to fundamentalism, to Messianic Judaism or Islamic extremism? We have to restore this in order to have a future together, to share this planet in peace, in justice, before peace. Okay, so I think I'm finished. 2 minutes is early, but I don't think I have much more to say. If you have questions, we'll do it later. Thank you. I have 1 minute. No, I just want to say one last thing. I am the only man in this bloody conference.
Yes.
And I am worried a bit, but also proud. So thank you, thank you for letting me be in this. How is it called? Genocide? How you call it? I don't know. Not genocide. Genocide. Thank you.
Was not done on purpose, but came out like that, and we are also happy about. And yes, speaking about that, since you had 2 minutes you didn't use, maybe I could cover 1 minute also to say that was very important what you just mentioned, that if certain things are gone, you know, without speaking out, we leave then the realm to the rules of bots. And this is an aspect you didn't mention, but I think is very important to say, because it's also what is happening in Gaza right now is really a test that is going on in using also artificial intelligence to target people during war very extensively. So this is also something we need to, I don't know if you, okay, we can speak later when we have the conversation, but I also want to mention that here at the Disruption Lab, we are focusing on this specifically also because we have a research institute going on. Then at the end, I will also mention, and we are working together with people also to analyze and research how artificial intelligence is used in work context and what is the effect also on people and on the future of war, because unfortunately, this is what is happening. And we started the Disruption Network Club in 2015, in which we invited the drone whistleblower, Brandon Bryant. And in the same, he's a US drone whistleblower that has been also focusing a lot on this subject. In the same panel, in the same conference, I wanted to say, we have also a person from Gaza, Asma Al-Ghul, that has been working a lot as a journalist. Now, from what I understood, she's not in Gaza anymore, But it's very interesting to say because we had an interview from her that was online because she already in 2015 was trying to come to this conference in Germany. She was not allowed to come because it was very complex from her to leave Palestine. She was very afraid that she could not come back because of journalism and because the borders were controlled by Israel. And so we decided to have a video of her that you can watch online. And this video, she's describing the fear of the people in the Gaza Strip in hearing and living constantly with the sound of drones and the consequence of that. That is also a lot of psychological harm. So if you also want to hear from a person directly that experienced that, and this was 2015 in Gaza, just go at the very first conference we did at the Disruption Lab in 2015 and listen to her video. Just to say that, you know, this is something that escalated now, but has been going on for decades.
Yeah, I just add one thing, since I had the next time.
Then we pass to the next.
It's the last one.
Yeah.
No, because we talk about a lot about Gaza, but we forget about the West Bank. What is going on is it's equally terrible. The settlers are attacking constantly, and right now I received some news from the south of Nablus. The settlers are attacking badly and killing people. So this is going on daily. They are grabbing land, and so we don't have also to forget what is going on in the territories, because this Gaza thing sometimes distract also from what is really happening in the West Bank. Sorry.
So thank you, Manolo. Now we would pass to the presentation of Arzu Geybulla. She's an Azerbaijani journalist with a special focus on digital authoritarianism and its implication on human rights and press freedom. She has been covering developments in Azerbaijan for international media outlets since 2009, including Al Jazeera, Eurasianet, Open Democracy and Radio Liberty. Arzu is also regional editor for South Caucasus and Turkey at Global Voices. And in 2019, she launched Azerbaijan Internet Watch, a platform that monitors digital information control and its impact on civil society in Azerbaijan. Now I pass the word to you. Thank you, Arzu.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's always really weird to hear your bio read out loud when you're sitting on stage. I did all of that. Wow. Yeah, no, thanks for having me here and for giving me the stage to talk about digital authoritarianism in Azerbaijan. So tracing digital authoritarianism in my home country takes us back to 2003, when the government discovered it could block access to certain websites that were not to its liking. In fact, the Ministry for Digital Development, which had a different name at the time, decided that it had the right to ask local ISPs, the internet service providers, to just block websites containing material that the ministry described was contrary to mentality, tradition, and customs of our country, whatever that was. They never explained what it was. Now, since then, so since 2003, if we take that as a starting point, since then, the government has deployed all kinds of measures and tactics to spy on civil society representatives, to spy on public. They resort to digital censorship. They resort to traditional forms of persecution and repression. And as a result, of course, Azerbaijan, if you look at any of the freedom indices, has been doing pretty poorly year on year since 2003 when it comes to freedoms, when it comes to human rights, when it comes to press freedom. But to understand why Azerbaijan is among countries where networked authoritarianism exists and practiced, I'm going to take you on a quick detour explaining the political context. It will help you to really understand how we got to where we are today. Lucky for you, Azerbaijan's political context is very simple to explain and very simple to understand. It's one family, the Aliyevs. They have governed the country pretty much since the country's independence, and as is usually the case with single families staying in power for this long, the only way to do so is by exercising total and full control over key institutions, dismantling civil society, and implementing large-scale crackdown. In Azerbaijan, we simply refer to the ruling family as the family, or aile, as we say in Azerbaijani. There are other families involved in the mix, too, like the family of the wife of the president, the first lady, the first vice president, who happens to be the first vice president. But really, it's a system of clans, if that helps you to understand the context a little bit more, or members of the clans. And every now and then, there are some arguments between these clans. Some members of the clans get ousted, especially when they acquire too much power. So it's always, really important to keep your position within your clan. Now, what is really interesting about members of these families, of these clans, is that if you look at key government positions, a lot of them actually occupy those key government positions. They're in control of large-scale projects, they manage budgets, they hold powers and jobs that are normally pretty much unavailable to regular folks. Now, naturally, within this system, loyalty to the family, especially among those who do not belong to any of these influential families, is extremely important. Because that is the only way one may get a job, keep that job, especially if it's in a government institution or a ministry. Perhaps get a business deal, get a share in a government tender. So you really get the picture if you look at the system from this angle. Now, what the family also has is control over the country's energy resources, namely oil and gas. That's what Azerbaijan is really famous for. They control all the stakes, they control the revenues, they control where the money goes, and the money goes everywhere but into improving the people's livelihoods, into improving the infrastructure across the country, and so on inside the country. The government claims otherwise. And they do, at the end of the day, do invest in some of the infrastructural projects. They do try to fix problems, but these solutions are never long-term. They're never sustainable, especially when you look at the impact of these domestic investments. And in general, people and human capital-oriented investments are of little importance to the ruling government, to the ruling family, because these investments yield no profit for the government's coffers. Now, having covered Azerbaijan for years now, this is one thing that never really stops to amaze me. Decades in power, vast fortunes accumulated, reputation tarnished in between quite extensively as a result of all the money laundering schemes that the country has been mentioned in. There's still this lack of will to give back to the people, and it always amazes me to this day. So where does the money really go? Oh, it goes to all kinds of places. The first place is buying influence. In Azerbaijan, the family does not need to buy influence in the country because, they're crème de la crème. But in Europe, in the US, that influence doesn't come easy. And instead of earning a reputation, the government does what it does best. They bribe their way through. They bribe officials, they hire lobby organizations, and they do that not only in Brussels, they do that in Germany, they do it in the US. It's quite an extensive and elaborate network, and it works quite well to advance their interests when it comes to pushing how great Azerbaijan is and how fantastic the government is doing within the country. Of course, no one really talks about improving salaries, for instance, like the money that has gone into the lobby firms and all of this external investment, if only it was invested in the country. It would be amazing how much better the people will be doing, because the salaries will be better, or the healthcare system could improve, or the education could improve. Anyway, where else does the money go to? Azerbaijani government is obsessed with hosting international events. I don't know if you've heard of Eurovision. I'm sure you have. So we've hosted the Eurovision, we've hosted the Formula One, we continue hosting the Formula One race, we've hosted something called Islamic Solidarity Games, and we've hosted a whole range of international events, either UN events or other events. We'll host anything, even if it has nothing to do with Azerbaijan, as long as, Azerbaijan gets to be in the media for hosting an event. And sometimes they would create events, like the European Games. It didn't exist, but now it is, and Azerbaijan was the host of that. Sometimes the government would even host events that they have very little understanding of, like the climate summit coming up in November, COP29. Where else does the money go to? The money goes into offshore accounts. These accounts are used to purchase luxury real estate across the world. It goes into purchasing luxury goods from luxury brands, luxury yachts. It's all about the luxury. And it also used as a hush money. As I mentioned earlier, it's an elaborate scheme. And when the family gets caught doing all or any of the above, it isn't the family or the government officials bearing the responsibility. Naturally, it is the journalist, it's the rights defender, it's the political activist who exposes all of this corruption. Now, this has been the case for at least 2 decades, this kind of crackdown on civil society for covering what's happening in the country, while the leadership has been doing quite well outside. And, President Ilham Aliyev has been in power for 20 years now. He just secured a victory in a snap presidential election. And, sometimes I get asked, how did he stay in power? Like, how is this possible? Well, it's very simple. To ensure that you're staying in power all the time, you rig elections, which is what the government has been doing. And rig elections consecutively, pretty much since you've been in power. And in that context of rigged elections, of this vast amount of resources and the budget that the family commands, it happens against the backdrop of massive crackdown. In fact, when Azerbaijan had a snap presidential election in February, we had one of the worst renewed crackdowns in the country. Once again, media outlets has been targeted. Once again, independent websites have been targeted. And this is where the digital authoritarianism comes into play. It is against this background that we're seeing how the online and offline crackdown are combined. And the work of civil society has become far more difficult because in addition to dealing with offline persecution, in addition to dealing with arrests, in addition to dealing with frozen bank accounts, in addition to dealing with travel bans that you have, you now also have this online crackdown, right? When your website that you've been managing for a really long time gets DDoSed, or when your social media account that you have been using to reach out to your audience gets hacked and all of its content gets deleted, and so on and so forth. Now, I'll just give you an interesting example, or maybe just rhetorical question. Here in Germany, for instance, or in any other democratic country, really, when you go to vote, for instance, you expect a number of things, right? You expect open access to internet, you expect working social media platforms, you expect a variety of political opinions and ideologies made available to you in the news that you read, in the information that you consume. And most importantly, when you go to vote, you expect that your vote actually is going to count. That doesn't really work in Azerbaijan. And it hasn't really been working, unfortunately, especially in the last couple of years when we see this sense of digital authoritarianism take over and really become a serious threat, because originally, you know, when it all started maybe a couple of years ago, there were some ways that the journalists and the newsrooms thought that they can bypass censorship by, you know, using VPN providers, by, you know, upping up the security of their websites, by migrating their websites abroad just to make sure that they were accessible, or hoping that internet won't be cut off. But no, we've reached a stage in Azerbaijan where most of the independent news websites are blocked in the country for access. So the only way that you can access them is if you use VPNs. We've reached a stage where the authorities can implement throttling of internet when they want, which is what they did during the 2020 war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The internet was only accessible to the government institutions, to the ruling family, and to pro-government media outlets. For 46 days, people had pretty much very restricted access. And when VPNs were kind of part of the conversation, part of the solution, that maybe this is what we can use to bypass censorship, users of VPN services were accused of being Armenian or using Armenian products, because this is how the state was using VPNs or using the language around the VPN so that people don't use them. And what is really really interesting to mention, that during the 44-day war, we had this information pollution as well. Because normally the independent news outlets that would, for instance, provide you both sides of the conflict, right? When you would write about what's happening there and there, like in the context of Azerbaijan, we didn't have that because the independent news platforms were blocked, internet was throttled, social media platforms were not accessible, and you had this void. The only information that was made available to you was the information provided by the state. And funny enough, they were using social media platforms to get that information to you. Like Telegram was the platform, or the First Lady would use her Instagram profile to encourage people to post passionate nationalistic content to her followers, to the public. So it was really interesting to see how these tools were brought into practice and used to improve but to strengthen the language of the state. Now, in addition to the sort of the propaganda and how the platforms were used, we've also seen over the years how the government has invested this money, like speaking of where the money goes to, in purchasing a lot of surveillance technology. They've been doing this for a number of years. We've started documenting it back in 2013, 2014, when it became evident that they've been investing in so much tech that now when you look back and look at the timeline of the last 10 years, you're like, this is incredible. They've purchased technology that allows them to not only block websites, not only to prevent access to websites, but also to get into people's computers, to get into people's phones, to get into people's devices, and just monitor everything that people do, and not just civil society, not just the usual targets, but everyone in the country. So the technology has evolved because they've been spending and investing in using surveillance technology. Also, we've seen trolling evolve in the context of Azerbaijan. Before, if you could go, if you would suspect that you've been trolled online, you can actually go and figure out who this person is because the social media platforms allowed you this. These were real profiles with real pictures, and these were real people with real jobs, so you could track them. Now, over the years, this has also changed, and it's mostly changed through the availability of pages on platforms like Facebook, for instance. Now you have hundreds and thousands of fake pages or inauthentic accounts, how we describe them, targeting independent media, targeting human rights defenders, targeting activists who have social media accounts, simply flooding them. And one of the reasons why I asked the question about social media platforms in the previous session was because we've been honestly just trying to fight with social media platforms to take measures. It is impossible. I cannot sit and just take notes of all the fake, inauthentic pages on Facebook and give it to Meta and be like, here, take these down. Because by the time they actually do take measures, there are hundreds and thousands of more of those pages appearing online. So this has been one of the, I think, I mean, not the biggest problems in trying to find solutions to existing issues with platforms, but definitely something that has been going on. And I'm going to skip through the Guardian investigation due to my time running out, but I will focus on a few of the surveillance programs, let's just say, or spyware that the state has invested in, because they have been quite important. One of them that we've discovered early on was the telecommunications surveillance monitoring centers that were used within the telecom operators. We've seen how they've been using remote control systems, which basically collect data on uninfected devices that they infect with the spyware. We've seen deep packet inspection, which basically is digital eavesdropping technology that allows information extraction. We've seen SMS interceptions that they use as a result of having full control and monopoly over internet infrastructure in the country. And I mean, you know, mobile operators are obligated to provide information on users, and there is no request for a legal case. The state security services can request information, and this information will be provided. And when, you know, some activists from the civil society rely on two-factor authentication and they use SMS as a backup, it's a disaster because all of the mobile operators have access to it. And so if it's a journalist whose account is compromised, SMS 2FA, no, that's a battle lost, because then all of your social media presence is compromised because of this. Of course, we've seen DDoS attacks happen on a regular basis, and then something that has been in practice for a really long time. And most recently, and it's not like the government is stopping buying all of this surveillance technology. The most recent purchase has been Kandiru. It's another Israeli, you know, your presentation focused a lot on what Israel does in Exactly. A lot of this surveillance tech that Azerbaijani government has been purchasing comes from Israel. Pegasus, also Azerbaijan is one of the users, and Pegasus not only been used inside the country to target its civil society, it's actually been used in the context of Nagorno-Karabakh war. We were working together in an investigation with a couple of international organizations where, you know, pretty much during the war and in the 2 years that followed, it became evident that Azerbaijani government was deploying this kind of technology to go after not only civil society activists in the country, but also abroad. And there is one other form of digital persecution that I would like to mention before I wrap up my presentation. It's the transnational digital repression. You know, for years, as I was documenting the evidence for the use of authoritarian tech in Azerbaijan, you know, we always focused on what was happening inside the country, how they were hacking accounts, how they were using this intrusive spyware technology within the country. But now we are seeing, it's not just now, it's been going on for a couple of years now, how the authorities go after dissidents and exiled activists based abroad across different countries. And it's mind-blowing to realize that it's just this repression doesn't stop within the borders. It goes beyond, and it targets some of the most vulnerable members of the exiled or dissident community. Women are their favorite target, which is very fascinating on its own, because, you know, you remember how in the beginning I mentioned how much the government cares about tradition and culture. It's funny how a country that on paper respects women so much would actually go after women in such an open and very drastic way, using trolls online, harassing them in their pro-government media and whatnot. And so, yeah, I mean, Azerbaijan has definitely been quite an interesting case study. And this is something that I was, you know, that inspired me to actually start Azerbaijan Internet Watch. Back in 2018, I was looking at my colleagues from Venezuela, I was looking at my colleagues in Mexico documenting similar cases, and I was like, wait, Azerbaijan is kind of doing the same, and we haven't really been documenting all of this and putting it all into one place. And this is how AzNet Watch came about. I did a fellowship looking at information controls and the evolution of information controls in Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan Internet Watch came out to be a great archiving. It's almost like an archiving platform, which now is used by many different international organizations, or at least this is what I hear from them when I have conversations with them. And it's also a good place for me as a journalist, right? For me, it's evidence, and it's a way to also kind of keep fighting this state that invests so much, and I don't want it to go unaccounted for. Because I do think that eventually there will be an opportunity for a lot of the companies and organizations that actually do fight to prevent spyware technology from being sold can actually use this kind of information in their cases. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Arzu. Also, when we have our discussion, I would like to know a bit more about your project to understand how it works, because we have to say you are also not living in Azerbaijan anymore, also because of your work. So this is something you didn't mention, but I think the audience should know, because you also became a target. So I think this personal aspect is very important to say, also to show the importance of the work you are doing. And now we pass to Tanya Lokot, that is an associate professor in digital media and society at the Dublin City University. She researched protest and mobilization, threats to digital rights, network authoritarianism, internet freedom, and internet governance in Eastern Europe. She is the author of Beyond the Protest Square, Digital Media and Augmented Dissent, that was published in 2021. Her work has been published in multiple scholarly journals, and she frequently contributes commentary to leading global media, including Coda Story, Wired, Bloomberg, and the Washington Post. So now I will leave the word to you, and it's also very important to have you here, since you know, we are speaking also about war, and for sure what is happening in Ukraine is another thing to discuss. I didn't say you also come from Ukraine, so I leave the word to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. I think it's fitting that my contribution comes after we've spoken about you know, territory where violence and war are active. And we've also talked about a very clearly authoritarian regime and how it targets its own citizens. Because I think my case is a kind of synthesis of both of those situations. And it also resonates a lot with both Manolo and Arzu have talked about. So I want to go back to what we said at the beginning about networked authoritarianism and what the definition of it is, right? Where states, some authoritarian, but also some not authoritarian, who are very enthusiastic about using technology are also very enthusiastic about controlling technology for their own purposes and therefore using it also to exert control over citizens. And I think it's also really important to acknowledge that we're not just talking about regimes or governments, but we're also talking about certain practices that we start to see as authoritarian, and examples of control. And also, I think what Arzu mentioned is also really important, that these are transgressing national borders. So we're no longer just talking about national examples of networked authoritarianism, but increasingly we're looking at transnational or global networked authoritarianism. And, the example of what Russia has been doing in parts of Ukraine that have come under Russian occupation are really good examples of this transnational nature of authoritarianism. And of course, it's also something that is enabled by other actors, right? So it's not just states or militaries or intelligence services, but we're also talking about private actors, platforms, actors who build surveillance software or whose components are used in various technologies of control that all enable this transnational system and these transnational practices. So over time, what we see is that threats to online expression transform from threats to individuals, which we usually see examples of, to threats to systems, and they start to affect entire populations. And this is especially evident in active war zones. So we see that internet controls and mass surveillance become an accepted part of governing in both authoritarian and increasingly democratic regimes. And authoritarian regimes start to detect, repress, and target organizing, resistance, expression, and activism. And in countries like Russia and also Azerbaijan, we see that states are combining targeted denial of information services to specific people with surveillance, right, which is also a very powerful tool. But they're also then using information spaces to flood the zone with false and misleading information using automated technologies, AI, bots, and various networks to support this. So there's a variety of strategies, right? There's information technologies have evolved and so have controls over information. But we also see authoritarian practices moving from targeting speech and expression to also starting to target infrastructure and connectivity. So we're going from just focusing on specific expressions or speech, which are censored or blocked, to whole communication infrastructure systems taken offline, destroyed, or taken over. And these are some of the examples that I will be talking about today. So what this does to citizens who face this type of networked authoritarian control is it diminishes their agency because they're facing systemic threats, systemic abuse, but it also builds on existing capitalist practices such as datafication, censorship, filtering, right? And all of this is part of the digital authoritarian environment. So we see that on the one hand, we are still talking about global internet networks, but we are also having to acknowledge that there are borders and jurisdictions, but then also realities of infrastructure, which is actually really fragile and very easy to destroy or take over when the goal is set like that. So what I want to talk about is the impact of Russia's networked authoritarianism that we're seeing in Ukraine's occupied territories, in addition to all the trauma and violence that a full-scale invasion brings to a country. So these are a couple of tweets that were posted in 2022 in the very early days of Russia's invasion, a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, where NetBlocks, which is a civil society organization that monitors internet blackouts, filtering, blocking, they reported that several of Ukraine's cities and Ukraine as a whole faced full internet blackouts. So Kherson is a city in the south of Ukraine, which was a target very early on of some of these attacks. And we are seeing an example of not just territory or people or urban centers becoming, becoming targets, but connectivity and internet access also become targets. And so when that happens, when they become targets of military aggression, how does this impact people? How does this impact countries? And also, how can you build any sort of resilience when you are faced with a total internet blackout? How do you build a grassroots response to networked authoritarianism? So we see that here, Russia obviously is very much following in the tradition of Azerbaijan, because in order to develop their networked authoritarian infrastructure, they first exercised for a number of years inside the country. So Russian citizens were the first to face the brunt of the state starting to realize that, oh, the internet is actually a really important resource. We are already controlling traditional media, and now we realize that we need to control the internet as well. So Russia and the Russian state has, over the past 10, 15 years, resorted to a lot of the same measures that Arzu has just described when she talked about Azerbaijan, in terms of filtering, blocking, censorship, in terms of persecuting individuals for online expression, in terms of taking full control over the country's internet infrastructure, traffic exchange points, to a point now where the internet in Russia is almost under the full control of the state, and they can decide what's made available, what's not made available. We are even at a point where people have learned how to use VPNs in Russia, and the state is also now trying to figure out how to block particular VPNs and also how to criminalize using VPNs, in addition to criminalizing all sorts of critical online expression. But what happens now is we see that Russia is now quite successfully exporting some of these same practices to Ukraine, especially in the territories that it occupies. But it also does other things, such as completely destroying internet infrastructure and creating these vacuums of information and voids of information where, as we know, when you have a void, it's very easy to exploit, it's very easy to lie, it's very easy to manipulate. So the key question, right, is how do you deal with these kinds of threats? And while we don't have a lot of answers, I think there are some key ideas about how to foreground citizen agency and how to listen to citizens and see what they are doing in response to these kinds of attacks and this kinds of control. So part of the reason why Russia has found it so easy to take control of internet and communications infrastructure in the occupied parts of Ukraine is because it has learned to take advantage of the technologies that people use in everyday life to boost its control over citizens and their data. Russia has invested in technological innovation around e-governance services. So they have a really great system of e-governance services, which they've also now added biometrics to, which makes it really easy to control citizen information. But they've also built extensive online censorship infrastructure, adopting restrictive data and internet regulations and enabling really sophisticated surveillance tools, again, based on citizens' data that they've gathered, and also now facial recognition technology. So they've been investing very heavily in all of these technologies, so they know what they're doing. And this has created inside Russia a unique environment that we call networked authoritarianism, where the state is on the one hand really enthusiastic about technological innovation, but they're also really keen on controlling citizen expression, citizen use of information, and basically following their citizens every step. So now what we're seeing in Ukraine is this creep of Russia's censorship and surveillance tactics beyond its borders. And we see that it's also for Russia becoming part of their warfare, right? It's becoming part of their military arsenal, where they attack communications infrastructure, they attack information, and they attack the digital communication space in Ukraine, together with the traditional kind of military practices that we would usually expect to see, with attacks on military formations, with army fighting army. We're also seeing these kinds of attacks. So in Ukraine, there have been a few key ways in which Russia has targeted internet and telecommunications connectivity. And also, it's really interesting to follow the excuses it's kind of given. I mean, it's amazing that they actually feel like they have to find excuses. But as always, right, they invoke national security considerations for, destroying cell phone towers, destroying TV towers, cutting internet, but also, right, they acknowledge that it's very important to control the information space. So it's not enough just to conduct military attacks. It's also really important to use cyber attacks, misinformation, propaganda. So for them, that is very much part of their war strategy. And we see how the invading forces in Ukraine not only co-opt, corrupt, or control communication infrastructure, such as servers, energy grids, telecommunications infrastructure, but they also attempt to exert influence on the occupied population through controlling information and communication space. And they use their domestic networked authoritarian approaches to do this. So they successfully export all the things that they've already tried inside Russia to newly occupied territories in Ukraine. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a few examples of the various tactics and strategies that Russia has employed in territories of Ukraine that have either been occupied and were later liberated in the first year of the full-scale invasion, or that are still occupied, and also territories that have been occupied for over 10 years. I'm sure that's not a surprise to any of you that some parts of Ukraine have actually been under Russian occupation since 2014. So some of the networked authoritarian tactics that Russia uses are, obviously they physically occupy the territory that they've invaded, and they resort to physical repressions against citizens, but they also use both digital and physical surveillance to create an atmosphere of fear, which also helps control citizens. They also use jurisdictional occupation of networked space. So they bring their own connectivity to Ukrainian territory. They reroute traffic through Russian traffic exchange points, and therefore parts of the internet in Ukraine suddenly become Russian jurisdiction, right? Creating these deserts where either we see Russian control and basically all the laws that apply inside Russia start to apply in those occupied territories. But we also see the creation of information deserts in parts of the territories of Ukraine where they've completely destroyed infrastructure. So again, this is another message from NetBlocks where they conclusively show that at a certain point, traffic in Kherson became rerouted through Russian traffic exchange points after going down, right? So this is basically, we have specific evidence to show. But where this comes from is Russia actually annexed the Crimean Peninsula, which was part of Ukraine and remains part of Ukraine, although Russia claims it is now part of Russia, since 2014. Right, Russia's been weaponizing internet connectivity in those occupied parts of Ukraine. And instead of completely destroying internet and mobile infrastructure in occupied territories, Russia's actually partially subsumed it. So they simply brought in, Russian providers, rerouted the internet traffic, and now have full control over it. So within Crimea and the occupied parts of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, they've been doing this since 2014, 2015, and now they've also successfully done the same in parts of other regions of Ukraine that they have occupied. They've actually gone as far as they didn't just build a bridge to Crimea, they also laid a new undersea cable to Crimea, connecting it to the Russian mainland and therefore Russian traffic networks. And there's actually a specific internet service provider called Miranda Media, which has been the target of some really good investigative reporting, which at first pretended that it was a Crimean provider providing traffic and internet to Crimea, but it actually turned out that it was a Russian provider owned by Russia and controlled by the state. So we know now that they're also providing internet to parts of southern Ukraine that are under Russian occupation. So people suddenly wake up to a really different internet where they can't access many of the major social media platforms. They can't access any of the Ukrainian or Western media websites, and all they have is wonderful Russian state media, which paint a very different picture of reality for them. But at the same time, we know that Russia's, since the start of the full-scale invasion, they've destroyed 4,000 base stations of Ukrainian telecommunications providers or seized them. They've also destroyed more than 60,000 kilometers of fiber optic internet cables that have either been completely damaged and destroyed or captured by Russian occupying forces. And that obviously led to very large-scale internet disruptions for the targeted Ukrainian territories. So in some areas, such as Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, or the strategic port city of Mariupol in southern Ukraine, which has been almost completely destroyed by Russians, the internet was disrupted as early as the first day of the invasion. And that was also coupled with Russian attacks on the backbone providers. So some of the major national providers in Ukraine also face cyber attacks. So not just physical attacks, but also cyber attacks, which obviously also led to huge blackouts. And you know, in Kherson in particular, this situation remains in parts of the region which are still under occupation. The situation remains dire, but essentially, right, Russia is co-opting infrastructure. It's also co-opting information flows, because that makes it really easy for them to keep the citizens misinformed, to keep them threatened, to keep them fearful. And so this is a very important part of the networked authoritarian logic. And in parts of the occupied territories where there is no internet connection and no phone connection, it also makes it really easy to control people, because they have no way of learning what is actually happening. And we've had reports from some areas of Ukraine which were liberated, that the Russians basically told local citizens that Ukraine has fallen, it's now Russia, and they have no way to check because they don't have any connection, so they can't access any news that is real news. So it's very easy to lie or to misrepresent what is actually happening. And obviously this creates this weird regime where parts of occupied Ukraine essentially become jurisdictionally parts of Russia when you think about the internet, because it is now subject to Russian internet regulations, surveillance, censorship, that is all characteristic of the Russian networked authoritarian regime. So people find themselves in an information ecosystem that distorts the reality of war by spreading disinformation through anonymous Telegram channels, but also blocks access to proper news sources and social media platforms, and presents the situation in a very sanitized and completely distorted way. So essentially, Ukrainians in Russian-occupied territories are subjected to the same networked authoritarian restrictions that distort the information for Russians living inside Russia. Also, of course, we are still talking about targeted persecution. So Ukrainians are facing the brunt of Russian surveillance and persecution as well, including for things that they do online, right? So we know that Russians in occupied Ukrainian territories search people's phones for signs of for sympathy towards Ukrainians, or even access to information from Ukraine. So if you happen to have Ukrainian websites open on your phone, or if you're talking to Ukrainian phone numbers, you will get in trouble. Even if you have VPN on your phone, you will get in trouble. So we see a lot of these things monitored. And obviously, they're also resorting to symbolic punishments. So this is just a segment of a map of prisons in occupied territories that Russians have organized. This is documented by the Media Initiative for Human Rights in Ukraine. And there are punishments for Ukrainians in occupied territories who violate the draconian Russian internet regime. They're quite similar to those that Russians face. So Russia-installed authorities physically examine smartphones of people who are trying to evacuate to Ukraine-controlled territories in search of patriotic content. And they've also used online surveillance to identify people whom they consider to be critical of the regime, right? So obviously this has landed quite a lot of Ukrainians in trouble, including in particular journalists, activists, people who they see as a threat, right? So we have evidence documented by Reporters Without Borders in Kherson and in other parts of Ukraine, where a journalist said, from the start of the occupation, they looked for journalists as well as activists and elected officials. In short, anyone likely to hinder the Russian state's propaganda efforts. People were being accused of patriots, but even people who liked pro-Ukrainian content got in trouble, to the extent that sometimes somebody would serve prison sentences for simply liking pro-Ukrainian content or liking posts by other Ukrainians who the authorities found to be problematic. So the question is, right, you have all of this atmosphere. What do people do? How do they resist? Is it even possible? There are several ways that we see Ukrainians organizing to resist. They become very good at digital evasion, so they become good at using burner phones, cleaning their social media profiles, updating and camouflaging their location, learning what an inconspicuous phone looks like, what sorts of things you can and cannot have on your phone. They also physically evade digital surveillance, right? So they move location, they go offline to do really important partisan work, and they make up cover stories, which is really important in escaping to Ukrainian-controlled territories. But people also continue to organize, and sometimes the most important work actually happens offline, and online is just used for documenting that work. So the Yellow Ribbon Movement activists are quite active in all of the occupied parts of Ukraine, and they use encrypted communications and anonymized coordination to plan their actions. And then there are other people who post about them who are in safer conditions. But much of their work is symbolic, right? So they create content offline and document posting pro-Ukrainian content using pro-Ukrainian colors, slogans in occupied territories, and then document their work online on social media, like these screenshots from Twitter. So really, the takeaways here, right, is that there are strategies that both the state and citizens in this condition of exported networked authoritarianism can resort to, but obviously they're limited by, how much connectivity they have, and their broader resistance efforts are always looking ahead, right? It's restoring telecommunications infrastructure, but that's only possible in areas that are liberated. And yes, you can bring in a Starlink, but you can only bring it into a place that is already under Ukrainian control. Whereas elsewhere, people still have to rely on protecting themselves first and then planning what to do later. So I'll focus on saying that there are some reasons for optimism, that there are strategies that citizens and the state are developing, and that the state also realizes that building infrastructure that is kind of disaggregated, that is decentralized, is really important because it also makes this kind of connectivity less prone to destruction. But there's still a long way to go, and I think Ukraine is still developing other responses to Russian networked authoritarianism. But for citizens also, being informed and knowing how to protect themselves first and foremost, this is where it starts. And then we can talk about state strategies and state resilience, which is kind of the next step, which is what happens after the war is over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya, as well. Now I will do a round of questions, and then I want to pass it to the public. And before starting my question, I also want to remind the public online that is watching us that it's possible to ask questions on our chat. So if you are watching on YouTube, go on our website, disruptionlab.org, and on the page of the conference, you will find the chat, and you can ask questions directly to our speakers. So then if you have questions, I will bring it to them and they will answer. And so the first question is for Manolo. I wanted to ask you what's the current situation of the project, the Gaza Web3, and also how do you mitigate the risk of aggression from the air, since we spoke about that, so, and on lands, and how do you keep the hotspot active?
We are facing this. The bucket solution is one of those, so not to expose the people and to be inside of areas that are more protected. So we can't do much. I mean, it's that invasion, that presence, it's constant, as you heard. There's always a drone on top of your head checking. So this is really hard. We ask them to be careful, and as much as they can, but we can't do much from the. What can we do? I mean, this is a situation that is really beyond ingestible. How you say ingestible? you can you can deal with it. Not you can manage it. It's unmanageable. So what we do, we ask. Sorry, yeah. We ask them to be very careful, to stay inside, to not be in open space. And this is going on because now we're having these alley web trees that are working on. This is a way to protect them, but really it's hard to understand. When we had this news of the 6 people dead, it was shocking for us. That was the first time we had a direct hit on a place where we currently do web trees. So I don't think there is an answer to this question after all, as long as the invasion goes on.
You were mentioning before there are 20 hotspots active at the moment.
Well, there are, yes. They alternate. The number of people involved, they're not always together, and depends also on the situation on the ground. Sometimes they just cannot get out of their tents when they're in tents. Some of them are in tents. Some of them are in houses that they are still up, very few. And so yeah, they move around. They try to do it. We try to do it next to the kitchens we have, so the people that come to eat, they have access to also to the internet. Yeah, this is it. This is it. We are trying, but it's also hard to ask them. You know, we can't ask them. Oh no, you have to do this. It's crazy, you know, because it's. So we just provide the tools, give them suggestions, give them the eSIMs, and they just self-manage their opportunity. They know what they need to do, and we're always scared on reading their messages, you know, because you don't know.
And Arzu also wanted to ask you if you could elaborate a bit more about your own project, that AzNet Watch, because we didn't have so much time. I think it's very interesting also to explain how it works and how it's functioning.
Sure. So AzNet Watch, as I mentioned, was the brain creation of someone who's been documenting and covering internet censorship in Azerbaijan. I've been personally myself target of online harassment, and as you also mentioned it, I wanted to not only be able to tell my story publicly, which is what I was doing ever since being targeted in 2014, but I also wanted the forms of censorship and the forms of technology being used in the country to target people like myself and people in, like, more broadly, to have some kind of documentation and monitoring platform where all of this information can be made available, where perhaps people won't feel vulnerable, you know, looking for it or asking for the information to be shared. So I was doing a fellowship at Berkman Center at Harvard University. It was an information controls fellowship. It was funded through Open Technology Fund. And at the time, my idea was to look at information controls, how this evolved in the country, where it was coming from, how the government got so into this kind of surveillance technology to target civil society in the country to an extent where it wasn't just individual cases, it was public at large, and that was dangerous for the future of the country. And when I finished the fellowship, I did the research, I published the paper. I guess this is kind of goes to what can be, whether Azerbaijan Internet Watch can be used in other contexts or in other similar contexts. This is basically what happened. I finished the research, and I was basically provided with opportunity to turn this research into an ongoing standalone project. And that's how AzNet Watch platform was created. And thanks to the partners that worked with me on this project, you know, you mentioned NetBlocks. I worked with Uni, who helped me monitor and document the extent of censorship against websites in the country. We would publish quarterly reports on how many websites are blocked, what kind of blocking is being used to target these websites. I worked with Virtual Road Aquarium to do very detailed forensic investigations into phishing. We did investigations into hacking attempts. We tried to find out who was behind them, who were where was the source of all of this targeting. I later had a chance to work with incredible lawyer who knew Azerbaijan's legal system inside out, but who was also really curious to learn more about the technology side of the legislation. And we had a series of reports looking at how Azerbaijan's legislation changed over the years, making it much more easier for the government to adopt texts, legal documents that could be then used to target civil society online. And this is one of the things I didn't mention in my presentation. It was, you know, not only the government was investing in surveillance technology, not only they were improving their digital authoritarianism game, but all of this was also happening at the same time as the government was changing legislation. And the changes made to the legislation were becoming harsher and harsher. I mean, the most recent change to the law on media, this media registry thing that they come up with, all of these things, you know, it's all part of the package. And so AzNet Watch did all of that. You know, it's documentation, it's monitoring, it's exposing, it's investigating, and it's, again, as I said, it's an archive for research for anyone who's interested. And I think it's definitely a way or a project that could be used in other contexts. In fact, improving it and finding more partners. As I was listening to your presentation, I was like, oh, you know, this organization works on like bringing internet to communities where there are problems with internet access, or like that, you know, company does this and that. So it's that. That's how Azerbaijan Internet Watch came about. It's still, you know, it's completely online. The partners were amazing throughout the years, and, you know, I send them my appreciation for working with me on this. And I think it's definitely usable in other contexts.
Thank you. And Tanya, I wanted to ask you, in respect of the discourse of the resistance in Ukraine toward the digital authoritarianism, what can we learn from the experience from the grassroots situation of the civic society? You were also mentioning this group, the Yellow Ribbon. Would be nice to know a bit more. What are the people doing, and how this resistance is working, because it can also be an inspiration for other war contexts.
Thank you very much for that question. I mean, I think the key thing we're learning, and obviously, you know, as researchers, we have limited access, because that is also part of how the activists in occupied territories protect themselves. But I think the key takeaway, and this I think echoes some of what Arzu said, is that it is really impossible to separate the online and offline aspects of networked authoritarianism. it's not just digital because we say it's networked, right? It's exactly because it mirrors how we live our lives, that it's both online and offline. And so this is something that I think a lot of global digital rights and digital security activists already stress very strongly, is that a big part of digital security for activists in under threat is physical security. And so knowing not only how to protect your accounts or your device, but also knowing how to protect yourself as a person, about knowing how to protect your location, knowing how to protect the people close to you. Like, those are all really important aspects of staying safe under networked authoritarianism. And I think any digital security strategies that are developed either for people in occupation or for people in active war zones should take into account, and many of them do take into account, both physical and digital security. I think that's really important. In terms of movements like Yellow Ribbon, I think for now, they're so inspirational because they do seemingly these things that might on the surface seem meaningless because, oh, well, it's just symbolic, they're just painting the Ukrainian flag everywhere around cities, but they're actually putting themselves in a lot of danger. But I think the work they do has huge symbolic impact because it reminds people under occupation that they're not alone. It reminds them that there are others like them, and I think these symbolic actions have a lot of power. I think it also counteracts a lot of those disinformation narratives that come from Russia that, oh, people under occupation in Ukraine, they're all pro-Russian, they all are happy to see Russia there, they all want Russia there, so therefore they're part of Russia, they're not Ukraine. Those photos and those messages, where they post little leaflets with Ukrainian poetry, where they quote Ukrainian writers, where they quote, like, this city is Ukraine, Crimea is Ukraine, that is also a response to these disinformation narratives. So that is also really important because it counteracts those narratives that Russian disinformation pushes, and it says, no, actually, a lot of us here are pro-Ukrainian, and we are not happy to have Russia here. It has never been welcome. We are looking forward to victory, and we're looking forward to restoring justice. So I think, these actions might seem symbolic, but the activists put themselves in a lot of danger, and they've also developed really effective mechanisms of organizing where they're almost not really relying on digital technology to do their work, but where digital networks become important to them is in actually increasing the impact of the work they do and of the symbolic acts that they do.
And Arzu, I wanted to ask you something else because you were mentioning also the various techniques that the government was using to intimidating users online. And also the fact that Azerbaijan was on the list of the customers that brought Pegasus. So since we have been also dealing a lot with the discourse of Pegasus here at the Disruption Lab, I would like to understand a bit better how did it work? You were also mentioning that Pegasus was used to target Armenians. So can you tell a bit more, how did it work with that?
Thank you. That's the thing. There's so much different technology being used that I think soon we're all going to be experts on the use of these intrusive technologies. I mean, Pegasus is one of the most intrusive spyware technology, right? It infects your device, and now with a new iteration of it, you don't even have to click anything anymore. Before it was, you had to click. It was more of a, the link would take you somewhere. Now it's just, even receiving a text message is enough to get your device infected. So that's how it works. It infects a device, whether it's a laptop or it's a phone, and that's it. All of your information is available to the perpetrator of the attack. And as I mentioned, it was not the only intrusive technology that was used by the government. It was one of the most recent, and the one that was exposed the most, also because Pegasus had a very long list of customers, right? Azerbaijan was not the only one. I think this is why it made such a big scandal that Azerbaijan was just one of many countries where Pegasus was used to target well-known civil society representatives. We had journalists there, we had human rights defenders, we had, some of them are actually currently behind bars, whose devices were infected and whose information was then made available to the perpetrators. And yes, then we learned that it was actually used to target Armenian civil society. And to me, that was one of the mind-blowing, because I was accustomed to reading about these investigations and getting information on the type of technology the country was buying to use against its own civil society, and then to target its dissidents and exiled activists. But then when we've learned that they were actually going after people in a different country during an active phase of war that the country itself was fighting, was quite surprising. Well, maybe not surprising. I shouldn't be surprised at this anymore. Really. But yeah, this is how it all came about. There was a group of Armenian tech gurus who work on digital security, a group of international organizations that actually do forensic investigations. And when it was, Armenia, Azerbaijan, there are only a handful of people who work on these topics and investigate. And then I received information, and then we started looking into it, trying to verify and whatnot. And that's how we've learned that it was actually used between October 2020 and December 2022, when it was being used.
Yes, and then I have a question for Tanya, and I will do the last question to Manolo before we open with the public, because you were also mentioning that the Russian invasion brought a mix of external cyber warfare tactics and information manipulation approaches. Could you explain a bit better how this worked? And I would be also curious to know, since now we were speaking about what happened in Armenia, if then this kind of techniques go also beyond the borders of Russia and Ukraine, but reaches also dissidents that are abroad, for example.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that question. I think the combination of specific attacks on physical infrastructure and destruction of connectivity combine with attempts to control the information space or to create a kind of threatening environment, and I think that's by design. So I don't think it was random. I do think that going in, Russia knew very well, and we know now from investigative work that they actually did a lot of research into figuring out which infrastructure they were going to target in order to destroy it, because that's just a very quick way to take out information and access to information for a lot of people. But they did it deliberately so that then they could bring and spread disinformation, especially in specific locations like smaller towns, where once you wipe out the information infrastructure, it's very easy to bring in a collaborationist government or set up an occupation government who will basically lie to people, and people will have no way of verifying whether or not the biggest regional city or the country on the whole and the government are still in power, or maybe they've fallen. Again, we know that was effective. So I think this combination of destruction and then strategically instituting other sources of information and making sure they were the only sources of information was actually quite effective, and it was very scary. So I can kind of quote to you a quote from a journalist from Luhansk region, part of which was occupied. Well, part of it has been occupied since 2014, but even more became occupied in 2022. And so this journalist, who later escaped, she worked for an online newspaper, and she says, people in uniform came to our office, photographed our equipment, searched through our computers, and made sure we were only disseminating information that they okayed So basically, they instituted full control. They were only disseminating pro-Russian disinformation. And the journalist says, I was devastated. How could we accept this? And so for her, this basically discredited her work as a journalist, which is why she tried her best to resist. But then she realized that the only way she could resist was if she left and continued publishing the truth about what was happening. And now remind me about the second part.
So if this kind
Yes.
of...
Dissidents. Yes,
the
I remember
dissidents
that. Yes.
that are beyond borders?
Yes, I mean, definitely. I think I would probably echo what Arzu has said about, especially the use of surveillance technology, because obviously in Russia itself, a lot of the activists that were previously operating inside Russia have also had to leave because, a lot of them were targeted and they feared for their lives. And we know that the Russian authorities have also been trying over the past 10 years or so to break into their social media accounts, to target their devices, to follow them physically, even if they're no longer in Russia. So there have been multiple examples of people whose Telegram accounts were broken into, and SMS interceptions for two-factor authentication, and also basically like physical attacks followed by digital surveillance. So this is also definitely happening, and so I think this transnational aspect will be something to watch because we know that all of the authoritarian states are learning from each other. They're all buying the same surveillance software. They're all using the same tools. So there is a lot of authoritarian learning going on, which is very troubling.
Thank you. And Manolo, I have the last question from you, and then we open to the public, so please be ready. I think it's also interesting to know from you, since this is a very repressible technique that could be also happen in other contexts, if you could elaborate a bit more on that, this idea of the web trees can be applied in other war zones, what the people can do, and do you have also the knowledge about other contexts in which this happen, for example?
So, no, why Web3s are working in that area? Because we are very close to a border. So this is the only gimmick that it makes it possible, because then you get connected to the Egyptian, as you saw by my art was explaining, and or to the Israelis. Yeah, we also get connection from the Israelis. So this, it depends from the geographical position where it can be used or not. If you're close enough to a border, so this is quite specific solution. But what is interesting, what we find out, I didn't even know, that there is an agency within the World Food Programme that does this job. Because access to information and communication, it's a digital right that should be guaranteed to everybody. So there is an agency, it's called FitTest, such a name they found. It's crazy. That should do these jobs, like providing internet connection to in the areas that are subject to violence or occupation. And they did that in Ukraine. As you know, no? But they're not doing it in Gaza, no. So we asked, I've been writing and trying to understand. There's actually a website that gives information on what they're doing nothing. Like they asked for the permission, but Israelis didn't give them the permission to do it. So this is not happening. And this is also about the double standards. We have to be honest about this also, because on Ukraine there was like the satellite signal from Elon Musk that worked for a while. It's bad, but that was, and that didn't happen. And elsewhere, obviously, that area is subject to a kind of oppression that is deep and hard to work around. So we hope it will not be necessary. We hope that in the future these, at least as the food, as the access to education, as the access to the cure, to healthcare, this should be one of the basic human rights that you have, because without communication, as we are well explaining, you don't have the elements to react to injustice, to share information, education, access to education. This is basic in order to have a development and to have an equal development around. So we are one of our plan is to push more on fittest to understand why they're not doing their job as they should.
Thank you. And now I will open to the public. I already see two questions. We can start from the back. Then we come at the first row.
Thank you for the presentations. I kind of wanted to bring in a perspective of having distrust for any nation state, media infrastructure, any oligarchic run infrastructure. And it's kind of complicated that we're mixing Gaza and Ukraine situations together, because it's a difficult thing to see those in the same light. But when I listen to Manolo, and I know about Manolo's work, who's bringing very grassroots energies to a very brutal situation and showing solidarity for the people, and giving a kind of access that isn't a nation-state perspective or a nation-state infrastructure into the situation, then that's kind of like something we can trust. But if we're talking about this Ukraine situation, which I think the media is very, very slow to pick up on, just like they're very, very slow, the corporate media, to understand how much the Western media is clinging to Israel's justification for what they're doing in Gaza. There's some similarities there actually about how Ukraine is being reported on. And so I would say that any oligarchs that are involved in investing in this kind of infrastructure is something that the people should be warned about what they're being led into, what sort of agendas are behind that. And I just kind of provocatively use an anecdote here and ask Tatiana if you think that having an oligarch-sponsored TV show with a comedian character who later becomes president, is that a kind of information warfare that is occurring on the Ukraine people? Is that also a kind of misinformation being misused to lead a country into a war that didn't need to happen?
Thanks. A valid question. And I'd say that having satellite internet controlled by oligarchs such as Elon Musk is problematic also because the oligarchs are often unprincipled. And we know this because Starlink is used by people in Ukraine, but it's also used by the Russian military. And so it seems like Elon Musk doesn't really care who uses his technology. To respond to your question about the second part, I don't think there's much connection between a TV show with a comedian and what is happening in Ukraine now, because the show was long before Zelensky became president, and I don't think the two things are in any way connected. But also, the war was started by Russia, and Russia was the country that invaded Ukraine, and I think that has been made very clear. It's very obvious who the aggressor is. There's only one country that is illegally occupying the territory of another sovereign state, and that is killing its citizens, including civilians and children, every day. So I think the questions about whether the war needed to happen should probably be directed to Mr. Putin and to his armed forces and not necessarily to the Ukrainian side. Thank you.
Yes, and also, I mean, since I was put into the game, I would also answer to you that the perspective we are bringing here is the one also to speak about the victim of aggressions and people that are trying to fight back. And so we are speaking about war context in which people are dying, and the people are also trying to resist. And since the conference is about digital authoritarianism, a form of oppression in war zones, there is a war in Ukraine, there is a war in Gaza, and we are on the side of the people that are suffering and are dying. So this is what we do. But now I will pass to you, Irma.
Hi, thank you very much, first of all, for all of you three to express these enormous, how do you say, like very extreme cases, right, of what authoritarianism and digital authoritarianism does to a civilization. And I recently graduated, or like around the time that all of the war conflict happened, I graduated in artificial intelligence, and looking at the job boards, it was basically surveillance, working for the government in more surveillance, or like, you know, making very, very rich people richer, like that sort of thing. So focusing more on like the West and our country. So I come from the Netherlands, which is very known for like using AI on a huge scale on their civilians, but also in international information warfare. And looking into the European AI Act, for instance, we like, even though like the people that set this thing up in the first place came more from like digital rights bases, which were basically mostly focusing on mitigating against those specific risks, and right at the like sort of end maybe, or like finalizing the agreement, there were loopholes created in order to make basically like this authoritarianism a lot easier. Right, so I was wondering for all of you three, but maybe in particular also Arzu, because your story is, I think, a little bit maybe, yeah, it's less like conflict related at the moment and more like a general story. Is like, what would we, like, what is the kind of political notion that we should have for the EU AI Act, and and how should civilians like react to the fact that our governments are creating these law loopholes to survey our conversations and the ways that we can move about.
Thank you. It's not an easy question to answer, but I think I will try to respond to it as I normally do when it comes to this question about solutions. Like, what can people do? And what I find the most challenging about not only conversation around AI, but also the conversation around surveillance and mitigating all these risks is the way we react. And by we, I mean the civil society, right, is reactionary. Something happens, and then we try to find solutions to something that affects us quite deeply. And when it comes to technology that's made available to people like myself, it is also reactionary, right? So I am taught how to protect myself, how to be digitally secure, how to not use SMS as 2FA because that's really dangerous and whatnot. But this is not the kind of technology that prevents surveillance technology or AI from developing further and then affecting people like myself even more, making it much harder for people like myself to find new solutions to much more complex and much more challenging technology. And so my, I guess, response to this is, can we, as a community of activists, as a community of developers, as a community of policymakers, actually start being ahead of the technology that is affecting all of our work, not just the targets themselves, but more broadly. And I think this was like one of the recommendations I even wrote in a paper recently, was that we're too late in the game. And that's what seems to be one of the biggest challenges that we have. So how can we get ahead in the game so that when NSO or any other private business comes up with yet another technology, we're not trying to like put out the fires, but actually have a system that will prevent the fire in the first place. Oh, I mean, yeah. That's true.
Because was to everybody. No, basically it's a matter of money. Let's be honest.
I didn't want to say it, so thank you for saying
So
it.
no, because then there's elephant in the room. I mean, if we don't have the money, if there is not investment, and the infrastructure itself is private. Bloody hell! Again, it's like if it's true that having access to information is like having need to medication and to food. It's like all of that is privatized. So I think that the battle that somebody is doing in the European Union to have an independent structure that doesn't belong to privates that have their agenda and they will never let you, and you will always be running after them. We will never be ahead of them in this. We have been for a short period at the beginning when we had in the media, we had some tools. They were always running on the same infrastructure. The road was built by others, but they didn't understand yet. Then that's the only time I think we were a bit ahead of the time when we started with the open publishing and things that have been subsumed and used and put in at work for the capital. So I think that is the problem. So we should start because there's a lot of people. Most of the people that is developing this stuff is on our side. I mean, would love to do it in another way. But this is capitalist. We are living in a capitalist structure, and this is the shit. Sorry.
Do we have other questions?
Yeah,
okay, go ahead.
I have a question to Manolo. I just want to know if they're different or if it's the same. I see on Instagram that you can buy eSIMs. Is it the same as the Web3s now? Because I see that a lot of people in my environment did it, but I don't know if there is a connection. Is it the same?
Okay, so that's basically Gaza eSIM is one of these organizations. It's Mirna Elabawi that is running. It's an Egyptian lady. But they have a different system. So you get this, you buy as a donor one of these eSIM. You don't activate them, and you send. Usually it's a QR code or just a string. You send it to somebody. So. You send it to them, to a central point, to a mail, and then within that, this organization has contact with people that has those telephones that can accept the eSIMs, and it gives it to them. So this is, but this was we thought that this was a bit problematic. It's okay, but this means there is a class different. Only who can have those kind of telephones can access to this service. So the idea of the Web3s was to break this problem and make it available even for very primitive telephone, because we are using those more quality telephones to become a router and then to have a very open access. So this is the difference we're doing.
There was a second question, yes.
I will just go from the online audience because I think we are, almost wrapping up. So there was a question for Arzu, or rather one, like a small series of questions. So they're asking, how about independent media in Azerbaijan? Are there any platforms in Azerbaijan which are not influenced by the family? And is there any independent social network that journalists and activists use in Azerbaijan? So it was like a small digest.
Okay, I hope I am able to answer all of them. Yeah, I mean, so there are independent media that are not managed by the family. They are very few in numbers. There were a few of the platforms left in the country. 2 of them have been targeted in the last few months. And a lot of the independent or opposition media, as we refer to them, have actually been operating from exile. They've left the country back in 2017, 2016, even before that, given the crackdown that was going on. So there is independent / opposition media. Some of it is in the country. a lot of it is outside of the country, and they're not being influenced by the family. Whether there are social media platforms, I mean, these media outlets, because first of all, they've been blocked in the country for access, right? Their websites aren't accessible. Because of the crackdown and because they were forced, some of them were forced to leave the country, they rely on social media platforms to publish their content. They rely on Facebook because that's a quite popular social media platform. Twitter, not so much. Some of them have Telegram channels. They all have Instagram. A lot of them have YouTube channels, especially those where they have like video stories being published. So it's not just one social media platform that they use. They use multiple that are available and they're popular and that are their common way of sharing their stories. The problem is how social media platforms respond when these media outlets have issues. Like when they're being trolled en masse, social media platforms are super late to prevent or take down those inauthentic accounts. When they're being reported on YouTube that allegedly the video content is spreading false news, YouTube takes its sweet time to respond and actually bring back the content that they take down as a result of mass reporting on their platforms. So yes, there are, but they're all work in extremely, extremely challenging environment, especially those who are on the ground. I mean, I'm not mentioning names, but I might as well. November 2023, AzNet Media, one of the few independent investigative platforms, got targeted. Their journalists, like entire newsroom was sent behind bars. And on bogus charges, smuggling. Like, this is what the government does. They smuggle, they launder money, and yet it's the journalists who get targeted for that with the same charge and for exposing the extent of corruption of the ruling family, of the government across the country. After the election, and in between November and March, we had multiple online news platforms being targeted, their editors being arrested, on the same charge, smuggling. For some reason, this is the new thing. It used to be hooliganism, it used to be drug possession, now it's smuggling. It's the new hip charge to go after, to level against civil society. And in March, we had another outlet, Toplum TV, also targeted. Their office was sealed off. Several of their journalists also charged with smuggling. So this is the kind of environment in which they operate. And even if you have an office there, by this point, I have a feeling that ahead of COP29, the government has really made its intention and clearly shows it that they want to silence anyone who can actually speak up their mind and who can report on the situation on the ground.
Thank you. And I would say we are over time. I first would like to say thank to the three of you and really give you an applause, and then I will give further information, but thank you. And I just keep you here for 2 minutes, because as usual, we would like also to give information to our audience on what is next. So we start our next community program at NGBK, as I say. It will be the 25th of April. And we will do an event that also connect pretty well, because it's called Pause, Play, Culture Under Pressure. It's realized in cooperation with the Kulturschaft e.V. in Berlin and Untitled Tbilisi. And this presenting cultural and artistic tactics of self-organization that are coming from the South Caucasus and especially from Georgia, Armenia, and Germany as well. So we bring together the different topics. And so you are welcome to join us the 25th of April at NGBK. And then we go on with our community program. The 9th of June at our office, the Disruption Network Club, we will do an event about anti-colonial technology. And the 4th of September, we have another community event, again at NGBK, together with Katrin Jacobs, and we will speak about deep fakes and online hate. And also, this is very interesting because she's researching a lot on how deepfake technology is used to create online misinformation and also hate speech and targets female and minority specifically. So we will do an event about that. And then our next conference is in September, the 21st and 22nd. It's called Migratory Currents, and is about the discourse of technological and artistic intervention to participate in shaping cities in a self-determined manner. And also we want to question the discourse of inclusion, so do also the subversion of this rhetoric of inclusion by also discussing on the discourse of self-determination between art and protest. And at the same time, we will have a technological aspect as well by discussing monitoring as well of migrants. And we go on also with the discourse of the Research Institute that I mentioned before. We are having 4 fellows among two whistleblowers. Also one is a military whistleblower, Lisa Ling, Jack Paulson, that is the executive director of Tech Inquiry, Naomi Colving, and Joanna Moll. And we will go on discussing and investigating the discourse of the information warfare, autonomous weapon, and AI. And we will do a conference as a conclusion of our work with the Disruption Network Institute that will be at the end of this year, the 29th and 30th of November, and also the 1st of December we will do our workshop. And this will be also a big conference because we will celebrate officially the 10 years of the Disruption Network Lab. And finally, as usual, I also would like to thank our team, the team of the Disruption Network Lab that work on this conference. We know that the conference is not finished because tomorrow we have 2 workshops, one from Berlin Support Assange and the other with Irma Basterbrook. So you can still subscribe them, and they will be in the morning starting at 11, in the afternoon at 2:30. And so finally, I really want to thank the team, and I'm going to mention all of them. Jonas Franchi, the creative producer. Elena, sorry. I didn't expect, okay, now you are going to applaud, yeah, you have to do to all. So then Elena Velianowska and Özlem Kaya, the Signal project managers. Agnese Trocchi, our digital communication manager. Mauro Mondello as a press strategist. Then, of course, the Boiling Head Media for all the team of the streaming. Maria Silvano for the photography. Paolo Combes for the sounds. And Francesco Mancori and Thorsten Oken for the technology support and the light, Francesco. And also a special thanks to Giulia Valenti that have been supporting us a lot also in these days. Thank you, Giulia. And all the helpers and the cash desk team that help us to go on this through this day. So now is... Özlem, I say at the start. Yeah, you are not taking attention, Manolo. Okay. And now with that, I think we declare that the conference is finished. We are all tired. It's a Saturday night. And thank you all this wonderful audience that was here with us. And also thank you to the online audience. Thank you and see you tomorrow.